Welcome to a Slice of SEL, a podcast for educators about social emotional learning.
Welcome to a Slice of SEL. We're the SEL services team at the St. Croix River Education District. I'm Nick.
I'm Rye, and we're missing our co-host Courtney this week because she's feeling under the weather.
Feel better,
it's
Courtney.
Just the two of us.
So forgive the irreverent nature of our episode title this week, #mindfulness. The idea this week is that mindfulness is a buzzword that's bouncing around a lot of conversations, offline, online. But what the heck is mindfulness? You ask a few different people exactly what it is, and you're going to probably hear a few different definitions. Or if you're like me, you've probably been to at least one professional learning session at a conference or at your school about mindfulness. And maybe 30 minutes in, if you're like me, you're going nuts because the presenter still hasn't said what the heck mindfulness actually is in concrete terms. It kind of reminds me of my favorite Ghostbusters line from Bill Murray, where he's like, pretend I don't know anything about metallurgy or physics and just tell me what the heck is going on. So we're going to try to answer that question. What the heck is mindfulness? And we're also going to give you a tip about how to have an easy peasy mindful moment. Like we're talking a few seconds here, literally a moment.
But before that, let's talk about what's filling our buckets this week. We were in our MDE community of practice earlier this morning, and we learned that today is International SEL Day today. So I just felt like what better way to celebrate than to record our SEL podcast.
You're so on brand, right?
Right.
What's filling my bucket is this kind of the same thing, like recording the episode, that it's about mindfulness. Because off air before we started recording, I was telling Rye I've just had like a crazy day of just meeting and just answering these emails that needed to be answered quickly. And I just felt all over the place. So an opportunity to remind myself to come back into the present moment and let that tornado of all these anxious thoughts go is really nice before we go into the weekend.
Practice what you preach, Nick.
Practice what we preach. And with that, we're going to shift into our main topic. So to answer that question first, what the heck is mindfulness? We're going to borrow some content from an article from the University of Minnesota. We're going to link that into the show notes if you'd like to read the whole thing. But here's one definition. Mindfulness is awareness that arises when we are paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. So that's a definition from the founder of the Stress Reduction Clinic at the University of Massachusetts.
So basically what Nick's saying is instead of my mind wandering to the past and rehashing and ruminating on mistakes I made, I'm bringing my attention back to right here, right now. And then instead of, my mind wandering unchecked and into the future, stressing about all these stressful possibilities that could or might happen, I'm bringing my attention back to right here, right now.
And in that right here, right now, I'm turning off my autopilot mode. So I'm being more self-aware, aware of my emotions, aware of the thoughts that are flying through my head, aware of physically what I'm hearing and seeing and tasting, etc.
And I'm meeting all of that awareness non-judgmentally. So if I notice that I'm not calm and that I'm actually very frustrated and mad at my coworker, I'm not going to beat myself up for that. And if I'm hanging out with my family in the backyard and a bunch of stressful work thoughts intrude into my brain, I'm not going to beat myself up for that either.
So now that we've expanded on that quote and that definition a bit, I'm going to circle back to it and just read it again. Mindfulness is awareness that arises when we are paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. So within that definition, I think there's three things wrapped into it if you want to break it apart. And the University of Minnesota came up with this, not me, but I'm grateful to them. Number one is intention. Number two is attention. And number three is attitude. So let's break those down a little bit. Number one is intention, the intention to cultivate awareness, just our intention to do that. Number two is where our attention is. So our attention is drawn to what is occurring in the present moment, simply observing, again, our thoughts, our emotions, the sensations that we're feeling in our bodies. And number three is that attitude of non-judgment, of being curious about what's going on and being kind to ourselves. So all of this mindful awareness, this being in the moment, noticing things, but not judging ourselves for what we're thinking and what we're feeling. It takes us out of autopilot mode, where we're just kind of humming along, almost not even making conscious choices at all, just almost going on instinct. That's what it feels like when we're just kind of scrolling on our phones through social media, very much on autopilot mode. And B, I think it helps us respond to what's going on instead of reacting to it.
Yeah, for example, say you don't get an immediate reply to an important text that you send your partner. And if you're running in autopilot mode, you might begin to worry that something has happened and get concerned that he or she is hurt. And then you're ruminating on all the possible things that could have gone wrong.
Yeah, and our default mode usually isn't mindfulness. Our default mode typically is autopilot. And when we're in that autopilot mode, we're tending to spend most of our day impulsively reacting to the events going on around us. And we're spinning out all these explanations, implications, all these stories, and all of that creates stress for us.
Yeah, and so you could instead choose to intentionally pay attention to what is happening and what's going on in the present moment. Instead of getting sucked into a tornado of worried thoughts, you might just notice, hey, I want to reply real bad, and observe, hey, I'm feeling really concerned about this.
And however, you won't react to that and escalate those thoughts. You're noticing, again, kind of what you're feeling, what you're thinking, and you're not feeding into it and making it bigger. You're responding to what you're observing about yourself, and you're proceeding more intentionally. So again, kind of shutting down that autopilot mode and taking the controls more yourself, being more intentional. And part of that response is this term that they used in the U of M article we're talking about, I really liked, is disidentifying. So we're disidentifying from our thoughts, our emotions, and the feelings that are happening in our body. So with that mindful awareness, we're simply trying to be with our thoughts, be with our emotions, and be with the feelings that are happening in our body instead of being controlled or defined by those things. So we realize, to put this in really concrete terms, like this worry is not me, or these thoughts aren't me. And that gives us the ability to see a situation as it really is. So this reminds me of what we often say to students, which is something like, you are not your feelings. That's one of the first things we teach like in lower grade levels, is just that idea like, you're not angry, like you're feeling anger. The anger is a little bit separate from you. So again, we're kind of being with those things and we're not defined by them or controlled by them.
When you think about it that way, it can be really, really impactful. So I like that. Now that we've hopefully given you some idea of what the heck mindfulness is, your next question might be, is it any good?
And briefly, we're not going to spend 10 minutes on our podcast going over research, but just briefly, the National Institute of Health, big organization, they pointed in their articles about mindfulness to a literature review study from 2014, where they looked across 47 trials with 3,500 participants. And in that literature review, they did suggest that mindfulness meditation practices and programs show moderate evidence of improving anxiety and depression. And there's also some interesting, some brain imaging research that I'll try to describe briefly. So the area of the brain that's associated with that fight, flight, or freeze response, the amygdala, is smaller in people who regularly practice mindfulness meditation. And in contrast, the area of the brain that's associated with, thoughtful responses, the prefrontal cortex, is larger. And these changes in the brain suggest that mindfulness practices lessen the reactive, fearful responses that create stress. And there's another part of the brain, the hippocampus, that's believed to be involved in regulation of emotion. And they've done some neural imaging research, and there's this program, mindfulness-based stress reduction, and participants showed an increase in the density of gray matter in the brain in that hippocampus, that part of the brain that's, associated with regulation of our emotions. So it may reflect this improved emotional regulation and a perceived reduction in our stress levels. And not wanting to spend all day on this, research summary, but a growing body of neural imaging research shows increased connectivity in the brain regions involved in attention, emotional control, emotional processing, and self-awareness for people who have that, training and experience in mindfulness practices.
Our brains and bodies are so cool. So before we go, we're going to share a few examples of techniques we can use to build our mindfulness skills. You may hear these called grounding techniques or anchoring techniques because the idea is that we're grounding or anchoring our attention to the present moment.
So one way we do this is called a body scan. During a body scan, we're intentionally focusing on different parts of our body. So for example, if you're seated, you might focus on the parts of your body that make contact with the ground or the chair. And you might then shift your attention to other parts of the body. And this could be done in a systematic process where you're basically scanning from your toes all the way up to your head. So you focus just what are my toes feeling right now? Then the soles of my feet, what are they feeling right now? And just progressing up. And Rye, this reminds me of something Courtney talked about way back. We did an episode on 5 ways to help your body chill out. So there's this thing called progressive muscle relaxation. Yeah, where Courtney, to help herself fall asleep, would tense for a couple seconds and then relax. Toes, feet, go up your body. And that's interesting. It's just mindfulness, I think, is very much about the brain and the brain observing itself and, focusing your attention like we've been talking about. The progressive muscle relaxation, that tensing and relaxing, if you add that part in, that's meant to help your body literally release stress, because your muscles get tense when you're stressed. So you could do both at the same time. Like what you just said, your brain and your body are connected. You can be mindful and focus your attention on that progression, that body scan, and then also just tense and relax if you want to add that part, and it'll actually release the muscle tension and pain in your muscles.
So unbelievable. Another grounding technique is just focusing on our breath. Our breath is always there, hopefully, and it's feeling and a sound that we can always anchor our attention to. So one helpful trick is called following your breath. So you try to find the exact moment at which your inhalation begins and ends. And then opposite, you try to find the exact moment at which your exhalation begins and ends. So you continuously try to track the start and end points with equal concentration and attention.
And I think your breath is always there, and it's just a way to focus your attention and pay attention to it by finding that moment when you're inhaling and exhaling, right? Because it just helps you point that spotlight of your attention right at your breath and kind of keep it from drifting away to all the crazy tornado of thoughts and stuff.
Yeah.
I'm super articulate today. Finally, we want to talk about the STOP technique. So it's an acronym, and the S is for slow down. And it means just stop whatever you're doing. Just pause for a moment. The T is for take a few breaths. So your breath is, like Rye was just saying, an anchor to the present moment. So let it draw your attention to right here, right now. The O is for observe. Observe your experience just as it is. Notice where your mind is, what you're feeling, what you're doing, where you are. P is for to proceed mindfully with intention. So use what you've learned during your check-in with yourself and respond to it instead of reacting impulsively to what's happening. So again, stop, slow down, take a few breaths, observe, and then proceed. And we'll also link into the show notes a poster as a good reminder if you want to get familiar with that acronym or teach it to students or your children. It's a nice little short way to remember how to have that mindful moment.
Yeah, pretty simple, right? Well, KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. No offense intended, but hey, we got to keep things simple. We're over a year into a global pandemic. So with that in mind, we do hope that this dip into mindfulness was helpful for you guys and that it helps you take care of yourself and the people that you care about.
So let's talk takeaways. I like how the University of Minnesota broke mindfulness down into those three things we talked about earlier: intention, attention, and attitude. So the intention to cultivate awareness, like that's what we're trying to do. Attention, focusing our attention on what's occurring in the present moment. So just trying to observe, like, what am I thinking right now? What feelings and emotions do I have right now? What sensations do I have? Like, are my shoulders tense? What does the air feel like around me? Just those sensations. And then our attitude, being non-judgmental and curious and kind about what's going on with us. So if you notice that you're running on autopilot mode, feeling stressed and reactive, like I was for much of today, Try to give yourself a mindful moment. Use your breath, scan your body, or do something else that grounds or anchors you to the right here and the right now. And then observe what's going on with you and proceed from that moment with more intention and a clearer direction for how you want to roll forward with the rest of your day.
So thank you for spending time with us. Make sure to subscribe, and if you're on YouTube, click the bell so that you're notified when new episodes are released each week. So we'll see you when you come back for another Slice of SEL.
Yay, thanks guys, bye.